On the 10th of August, 2019, as part of Lethal Amounts events in Los Angeles commemorating the 50th anniversary of the Tate-LaBianca slayings, Nikolas Schreck gives a talk about his film Charles Manson Superstar, which he screened on its 30th anniversary, and a lecture on his research into the Tate-LaBianca murders. Thanks to Stoner von Houten for arranging the filming of this event held at the Zebulon Theater near the LaBianca residence.
Some of his more extravagant ideas for what we should film, which the prison authorities did not approve. Originally, we were going to include an hour acoustic guitar concert that Charlie wanted to perform some of his new songs that he actually wrote for that. And at the last minute, when I turned up at San Quentin, the prison administrator, who already was nervous that I was not going in a hostile manner, he could already see that it was going to be somewhat sympathetic, which he didn't like, decided arbitrarily at the last minute to refuse Charlie's request to bring his guitar into the interview room. And that, as you'll see in the film, if you haven't seen it before, is why Charlie is a bit pissed off, which added to his performance, as always. This interview that is the core of the film was recorded on April 4th, 1988, which was Easter Monday, and Charlie gave, of course, significance to the fact that it was Easter, the day of Christ's rising from the grave. He also, when I walked in the room, this isn't recorded, noted that it was the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and he said, and they covered up everything about that too. So, the interview was the core of the film. A little word about how the film was made and financed. On April 14th, 1988, A Current Affair, which was a tabloid trash TV that some of you old-timers may remember, bought the rights to use. It was literally about a week after the interview with Charlie had been filmed, and Current Affair wanted to use just a few clips of the film. And at that time, when Charles was allowed to give interviews to the media, right that was later taken away from him, and actually which Charlie blamed on me for this film. So he thought because this film was a positive presentation and the tense reaction of the prison authorities, he blamed me for that, as he blamed me for many things. So it's part of our relationship. So on April 14th, shortly after the interview was conducted, A Current Affair broadcast just a few little tiny minutes of the film in the most sensational horror movie, crude, trash, tabloid TV way that you can imagine. And an Australian tabloid journalist named Steve Dunleavy, who has mercifully left this world only recently, interviewed me. And in that interview, I said to a national audience, when he asked me, Nikolas, how can you possibly have anything good to say about this man, this incarnation of evil? And, the trial, Vincent Bugliosi proved that he blah, 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 blah. So we know that story. And I said to him that, very calmly, that the trial that Vincent Bugliosi conducted was a show trial. And that, other than the distinguished company of Miss Fromm and Miss Good, really nobody had said that in public on TV that was not an actual member of the commune. So that one statement in 1988 made quite the impression. And when I went to New York to do the book signing for the Manson file, which had come out, it got a huge resonance, and a lot of just ordinary people on the street came up to me and said, I never did think Helter Skelter made any sense, and I'm glad. You would think people would hate it, but it actually got a positive reaction, that statement. So, Video Werewolf, the production company for the film, was the video arm of Radio Werewolf, and also under the umbrella of the Werewolf Order. And part of the Werewolf Order's concept was to use similarly to the original Radio Werewolf in the 30s and 40s, a resistance movement against the mass culture, the occupation culture. And the idea was, because I never had any funding then, and I don't have any funding one penny more now, how do you finance this film? So with the money that Current Affair paid for the rights to the film, which was substantial, and then later that year, Geraldo Rivera, another noted sterling investigative journalist, paid more for a more sensational and out-of-context use of the clips. The entire film was financed from A Current Affair and Geraldo Rivera. So, the final word about it is I just want to mention a few errors that I made. Now, normally I never make any errors, but in this case I did. So, lest you be misguided, I think I can name all of them, maybe not all, but most. I never did like the Beatles, so I care about them so little, I got it wrong that John Lennon wrote Helter Skelter instead of Paul McCartney. So Beatles fans, don't lynch me for that. The LaBiancas, who left this world exactly 50 years ago tonight, basically right down the street. In the film, I mentioned that they lived in Walt Disney's former residence, and that the Waverly Drive home was Walt Disney's residence. In fact, I was misguided there. They lived in a house on Woking Way a little bit earlier. That was Walt Disney's residence. Another important thing, shortly before I had made Charles Manson Superstar, I made the acquaintance of my future father-in-law, and at that time, when I made the film, I believed his fanciful claim that he was in the film Rosemary's Baby, and that he actually appeared as the devil. Interestingly enough, Roman Polanski's producer and one of his best friends, Gene Gutowski, who I interviewed in '94, and who explained what the murders were really about from his point of view, is who corrected Zena. Zena already knew that her father probably had nothing to do with Rosemary's Baby, but Polanski's producer personally said, absolutely not true. There was no technical advisor for the film, and he told us who the actor was that played the devil. So those are three, major errors, so I don't want you to be misled. And people have asked me why I don't edit the film or do a new version of it. Because the film is a magical exercise at deconditioning mass consciousness, it was a ritual. And the film is composed like a ritual. And a word finally about the way that it was made. It is a product of its time. It is a product of the hysterical, satanic panic, religious fundamentalism, Jerry Falwell, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, 1980s. And if you think American television is divisive and hysterical now, believe me, it was then, but in another way, So everything about Manson on TV that you'd see was always at this supercharged, hyperbolic, exaggerated, he killed many people under, the command of blah, 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 blah. And that was the tone of everything that you saw about him. So I very deliberately set out to make a very sober, calm expression of what Charlie is without all this exaggeration, without an attempt to edit it quickly and make it exciting or thrilling or horrific. And genuinely, the point was to decondition people. And the film is an exercise in what I was then using, a kind of magical hypnosis. I used my voice and edited Charlie's voice and the music and the exact composition of the images that I chose, almost the way that you would compose a song to create a certain emotional reaction. Like in the beginning of a song, you want the listener to hear this. At the end, you want them to have that emotion. So it is a very somber and slow film, deliberately to be in contrast to the hysterical and overexcited mood that you would find in 1980s television. And I think that's a big reason why people listened to it and why it made the impression that it did, that you are here 30 years later, is the tone of it was not what you expect to hear about Charlie. So, that's the final thing. When I made this in 1988, I'd known Charlie for about 3 years. My knowledge of what the crimes he was convicted for at that time was considerable, but it was not correct, and it was nowhere near what I have unearthed and discovered in the some 30-odd years since then. So you'll notice I don't really get into the crimes very much, and that was deliberate, because the point of Charles Manson Superstar, and I haven't changed my mind about that, he was an extraordinary person. Whether you hate him or love him, he was a remarkable, once-in-a-million-years person. Talented, poetic, and had wisdom that I thought nobody was paying attention to at that time. So I wanted to put the spotlight on Charlie and not on the crimes. When you've seen the film, I will get into the crimes, which I've learned much more about. But at the time, I wanted to show the man and not the murders, which is the only thing people associate with him. So I think that gives you the general context of why I made the film, basically how I made it, and what its magical intentions were. And I hope that you all enjoy it. Thank you for coming. I want to place the discussion tonight in the context particularly of Hollywood, of Los Angeles, of the entertainment, movie, and music industry, and how integral it is to the slaughter that occurred, which is something that in fact the entertainment industry, the music and movie industry would prefer that you not know. Because in fact, the truth about the murders and the crimes that Manson was convicted of has everything to do with a massive cover-up that the Hollywood entertainment industry and organized crime, which was a financial resource for them, engineered. So before we get into that, I want to read a few relevant quotes that I think capture the essence of all that. And I'll begin with a quote from a Vincent, but it is not our friend Vincent T. Bugliosi, but Vincent Price, who said many years ago of Hollywood, "If there's a power of good, it follows that there must be a power of evil. And I've seen evil. Years ago, Hollywood used to be one of the most evil places on earth. No, I'm not joking." Vincent Price. Mr. Manson said of Hollywood, "Hollywood's a deceiving place. Hollywood's a hard place. You think one thing, you think everything's like Bing Crosby, but it's not. It's for the control. It's the mind control center of the world." Manson. Again, Charles. "Hollywood will play anything for money, and I mean anything," he wrote to me in a letter many years ago. "They will cover up the lives of others so they can be a star and cheat others out of their lives. You only see them playing real people. They have all sacrificed their souls and made deals with the devil." Manson again, and this is particularly tied into the crimes, and I think it gets to the essence of how this whole phenomenon occurred, and frankly why people are still thinking about it with fear 50 years later. Charlie said, quite pragmatically, to my erstwhile colleague William Scanlon Murphy many years ago, The only thing that made that any different than anything else, he was referring to the August 9th murder 50 years ago, was that that broad happened to be an actor. If she hadn't been an actor, no one would have even heard about that man, and probably no one would have gotten busted. Now let's look at that casual comment. Why, if Sharon Tate had not been one of the victims, and she was not intentionally intended to be one of the victims, could it possibly be that that crime would not even be remembered, not even known about, and none of the killers would have been arrested? If that's the way Charles thought about the crime, it would seem to me, and as I have attempted to illustrate in my book, The Manson File, at some length, the crime was not planned to go the way that it went. Sharon Tate was not intended to be there. In fact, it happened because she was there, and that was a surprise to Charles Tex Watson. And the fact that the murder of a Hollywood star is frankly what has created the allure and the glamour of this crime, of that particular crime. Now, what was the motive for the Cielo Drive crime? I'm not going to get into that a great deal because I want to talk about the far lesser known LaBianca murders on this evening. Well, I can say in a very realistic way, after just a few days being back in Los Angeles and Hollywood, there's a few people I'd like to murder. So after 2.5 years of Charlie being here, it's very easy to understand his thinking. Secondly, does it require mind control or hypnosis to encourage murder? And that is something that I completely reject. So, I mean, somebody asked me earlier, but it was all about mind control, right? No matter what the motive was, and I said adamantly, not. So I think I need to stress that. Finally, another quote from Charles about the Cielo Drive murder, and this gets to the heart of what the murders were about. And like the quote in which he's saying no one would have been arrested if that broad hadn't been an actor, think about the significance of this that Charles said in 2004 to Crime magazine. You're upset because one of your actors got in the wrong lane doing something with the wrong people, and you want to blame somebody else for it. Now, what would that possibly mean, that one of your actors got caught in the wrong lane doing something with the wrong people? In what way could that possibly have anything to do with starting a race war, being influenced by Beatles lyrics, a copycat murder to free your dear brother Bobby Beausoleil, or any of the many other contrivances and cover-ups and excuses that have been used to explain these murders that your presence here shows obviously still grip the imagination of the world. I'm not going to go into incredible detail about this, as my book explains it more exhaustively, but what it comes down to, what is Charlie talking about? The wrong lane with the wrong people. It's very simple. It doesn't require mind control. It doesn't require the CIA or the Process Church of the Final Judgment or the reptile people or the Illuminati. But try to think about this. Here we are in Los Angeles 50 years later. Would you be shocked to learn that people in the entertainment industry may be using narcotics? Would you be shocked to learn that businesses in Los Angeles could possibly be a front for the distribution of narcotics to wealthy entertainment figures? Could you possibly, in your wildest dreams, imagine that on a Friday night in Los Angeles, a drug deal could be going on a little bit before midnight, right before the party people are going out into Hollywood to celebrate. I'm sure that makes me a crazy conspiracy theorist to even imagine that such a thing might be happening even tonight. But bear with me in this insane theory of mine. The fact is, after 30-something years of researching it, even though there's no doubt that the Cielo Drive murder was partially, and this only on the part, to my belief, Patricia Krenwinkel, and on the second night, the LaBianca murder, Leslie Van Houten, were those two naive and criminally inexperienced enough to really believe that what they were doing there was a copycat killing to free Bobby Beausoleil? Yes, I believe Patricia Krenwinkel and Van Houten probably believe that. However, after everything that I think happened after that, they couldn't possibly believe it anymore. Those murders happened because Wojtek Frykowski made a deal with Tex Watson and Linda Kasabian to buy a new drug that Wojtek Frykowski was trying to introduce into the Hollywood drug market, and that was MDMA, that we know today as ecstasy. And at that time, no one had hardly even heard of it, so it was a coup for a drug dealer, enterprising drug dealer like Wojtek Frykowski, who had not managed to make a hold in the entertainment industry despite the powerful patronage of his high school friend Roman Polanski. Abigail Folger, who was at the end of her rope, no pun intended, with Wojtek's basically leeching off of her, used some of her fortune to finance Frykowski's attempt to get into the MDA business, to corner the market on this new drug that at that time, in the slang of the 60s, as I was told by people who knew about his entrepreneurship, was called fairy dust. That was what MDA was called on the streets at that time. Wojtek Frykowski made a deal with Linda Kasabian, who had been a drug dealer arrested in Boston even before she showed up on the Spahn Ranch, and with Charles Tex Watson, who had formed a partnership in crime based on what she described as a, quote, mind-blowing sexual experience on the day that Linda met Watson at the Spahn Ranch in 1969. On July 4th, the fireworks that were going on there were between Linda and Tex. They formed this very quick criminal partnership, and with $5,000, and I want to keep this on a very pragmatic basis. This is about money, and that is what Hollywood's about, and that's what the drug business is about, and the motives have nothing to do with anything you may have ever heard. It all began with $5,000 that Linda Kasabian either stole, borrowed, or with the contrivance of a man named Charles Melton and her husband Bob Kasabian. They were saving up for a trip to South America, and she, one way or the other, she took $5,000 from them to give to Tex to manage this major drug deal. They wanted to buy some of the MDA and cocaine that Jay Sebring and Wojtek Frykowski had to begin their own lower level on the narcotics dealing hierarchy business, which is something Tex had been doing even before he met Charlie in 1967. Watson was already engaged in that occupation. So I want to keep it on the grubby, sordid level of ordinary criminals trying to make money, because that's all that is behind the smoke and mirrors that you have been exposed to for half a century. So that $5,000 that is stolen, which is something like 20,000 or more in 2019 currency, it's a huge amount. How much of it was given to Wojtek Frykowski, I cannot determine exactly. Memories are murky, people don't like talking about it in great detail for obvious reasons. From people around Tate and Polanski, what I've gathered is some large amount of that 5,000 that Linda took from her husband went to this deal. And this thing that Charlie called in the trial, in his testimony, this hideous thing, which is how he described the murders, it comes down to that. Now, I have not also been able to determine whether Wojtek Frykowski didn't deliver the MDMA to them, or something I've heard equally credibly from people involved, that what he delivered to them was faulty, or bunk in the language of drug dealers. One way or the other, they didn't fulfill their deal. And I won't go into the whole complicated history, but this is basically what happened with Bobby Beausoleil and Gary Hinman. It is a drug deal that went wrong. This is what happened. Are many of you aware of the name Bernard Crowe? You aware of him?
Lots of papa.
Exactly. So let's just take a deep breath and look at this. There were other drug deals gone wrong involving the Manson Commune and Charles Tex Watson that you don't know about, that I did learn about, that happened earlier in 1969. That wasn't even the beginning of it. But let's look at this from a bird's eye view, the context of it. Bernard Crowe is a drug dealer. Charles Tex Watson is a drug dealer. He makes a drug deal without going into the complicated mechanics of it. Tex burns Bernard Crowe, who was a fairly well-established syndicate drug dealer to the entertainment industry, and who many actors, musicians, and people in the production world knew very well. So Tex rips off a drug dealer, Bernard Crowe, and that's what led to Charles Manson returning to the apartment house of Rosina Kroner, who was Tex Watson's ex-girlfriend, and shooting him. What was that crime about? It was a drug deal gone wrong. And then we had Bobby Beausoleil and his disagreement with his friend Gary Hinman, who had sold him $1,000 worth of mescaline, that according to the Straight Satans, there was again something bunk about the mescaline that Gary Hinman sold to the middleman, Bobby Beausoleil, and then was given to the Straight Satans for their 10th anniversary celebration. So you have Bernard Crowe, a drug deal, a drug burn gone wrong. You have Gary Hinman murdered because of a drug deal gone wrong. Do any of you really find it unlikely that, or maybe you find it likely, that in the few weeks from the Crowe and Hinman murder, completely about ordinary criminal motives to do with rival drug dealers, which is happening tonight somewhere, as we well know, suddenly everything changes when it's not the unknown Bernard Crowe and the unknown Gary Hinman. When it's Roman Polanski's house, there can't be any drug dealers in that house. Jay Sebring, who Mr. Tarantino has so realistically portrayed in his recent masterpiece, he couldn't possibly be a drug dealer. Wojtek Frykowski, and this was something that Peter Folger, the father of Abigail Folger, who was an immensely wealthy heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, and a very unknown part of this, he made it absolutely impossible to get information about the crimes. He went out of his way to cover up what happened because he could not have the Folger family name smeared by the fact that his daughter was the financial wherewithal for Wojtek Frykowski to buy the drugs that made this slaughter happen. So is it really that hard to believe that a commune, a very ordinary commune that could be compared to hundreds of others at the time, that two of the people involved get involved in drug deals that go wrong, and then suddenly, though, on August 8th, 1969, that commune's belief system has changed completely, and it's all about Beatle lyrics, interpretations, wanting to start a race war, freeing their friend. Suddenly it's that, and of course, again, let's look at the two crimes that you mostly know of before that. Were they crimes between strangers, or were they crimes between people that knew each other? And this is the heart of what Hollywood and the entertainment industry is still lying about you today. And again, in reference, just to be topical, to the aforementioned masterpiece by Mr. Tarantino, which he presents innocent, lovely, delightful strangers, the epitome of 60s innocence and psychedelic splendor, who could have been mowed down by these evil cult of dangerous hippies. So just look at the logic of that and think about it. And ask yourself, is it really hard to believe that the Cielo Drive murders were in fact exactly what happened with Gary Hinman and with Bernard Crowe, except Hollywood cannot allow that to happen to honey blonde Sharon Tate and her usually nameless house guests. So that is the Cielo Drive murder. Now I want to briefly refer, because I think magically you have to look at the significance of names and their symbolism. When Danny Fuentes invited me to come here to show the film and to speak to you, I noted that his company is called Lethal Amounts. Well, what is this crime spree about is literally lethal amounts of drugs. Secondly, he titled this excellent exhibition that he presented at the Lethal Amounts Gallery, and this event tonight, in general, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in 1969, a takeoff on Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I cannot possibly convey everything I've learned about Hollywood's corruption and their dedicated effort to this very day to prevent you from knowing what really happened. But let's just take a few. How many of you have seen Tarantino's film? Could you raise your hands? Good. Okay, so you will generally know these are rather obscure details, but I have to preface them by saying I can tell you it's impossible to be at the elite level of the film industry that Quentin Tarantino is, as the protege of the charming and wonderful Harvey Weinstein, as the defender of Roman Polanski's rape of Samantha Guimar, which Mr. Tarantino referred to as she was down with it. So nobody in that position that Tarantino is in does not know the same open secret. If I've learned it from people in the entertainment industry in 1969, there's no way he doesn't know the basic essence of the truth. Furthermore, I know that he happens to have worked in a professional basis, Tarantino, with a fairly well-known Manson aficionado who worked with him on the film with Oliver Stone, whatever that piece of shit was called, Natural Born Killers. So I know I absolutely can tell you, he is well-versed to a certain degree in what went on. So the film he presented is a candy-coated lie. It's propaganda for Hollywood, and whether you enjoy or don't his postmodern efforts to make homages to his favorite film and show his favorite actress's feet, whatever you think of his aesthetics, that's what we have to see it. From the point of view of someone who knows what really happened, it is a sugar-coated lie. So let me just name a few details, and you can think about it yourself, and if you haven't seen it. Steve McQueen is a character very briefly conveyed in Tarantino's Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Steve McQueen is presented in a party scene where he's watching Sebring and Tate dancing, apparently an outtake from Austin Powers. How that got into that film, I don't know. And McQueen comments basically that, you know, he never had a chance with Sharon because this other actress says Sharon Tate has a type, that she only likes talented little men that look like 12-year-old boys, meaning Polanski and Sebring. And McQueen says, as if he's a high school kid pining after the unattainable cheerleader, I never had a chance. The reality of the lifestyle that Roman Polanski, Sharon Tate, Steve McQueen, Jay Sebring were leading, and this is not vicious gossip of the Kenneth Anger level. This is something many people who knew them told me and had no problem with, because that was the 60s. That was the sexual revolution. Steve McQueen knew Sharon Tate and was her lover years before, and Sebring and McQueen had threesomes using LSD with Sharon Tate many times. It's not a rumor, it's a fact. But Tarantino twists it around and presents it more wholesomely. Now, I'm not judging sexual promiscuity by any means. Not in the least. I'm not making a moral judgment. I'm trying to tell you how, just as Vincent Bugliosi carefully presented all of the victims of the crimes as paragons of innocence, upstanding citizens, maybe future presidents and Nobel Prize winners, which is normal prosecutorial method. You don't say anything that could be perceived as negative about the victims of a crime. So what Tarantino does is retell history there. But what else is there about Steve McQueen? Steve McQueen was one of Jay Sebring's main cocaine clients, as well as one of his main hairdressing clients. A lot of people will say, but how could Jay Sebring be a drug dealer? He was running this huge men's hairstyling empire. That was a front for the main source of Sebring's money. And Sebring, by the way, according to his bank accounts, was constantly in need of money. He was not making a huge amount through haircuts. He was making it with the little extras that he brought to the film sets and to his celebrity clients. Steve McQueen, the night after the Cielo crime murders, knew about it even before it was mentioned in the newspapers at all. And in the early morning of August 9th, was seen driving up and down to Eastern Drive to a house on Rimmel, which is where Jay Sebring's villa was. Why? Because according to Amos Russell, the butler of Jay Sebring, women were being sent to Jay Sebring's house to remove mysterious packages, and that they were panicked. This was before anyone knew about the murder publicly. Steve McQueen supervised and arranged getting Jay's stash, his friend Jay's stash, out of the Eastern Drive villa. And he did that successfully. So by the time the police arrived, there was no proof that Jay Sebring was a major narcotics trafficker. Now, that would be a more interesting film for little Quentin to entertain you with, but it's not the one he chose to tell. So I'll end this Tarantino bashing session with, oh, I will. Just one more. Yeah, it is a fairy tale. Yeah, yes, it is. Right, in the very worst way. Right.
Not about you.
Right. Okay. It is. Okay, that's not about me at all, no. Anyway, it's a fairy tale in the most sinister way. It is meant to lull you into being good little children, into believing basically the same lie Vincent Bugliosi and the powers behind him sold you 50 years ago. So briefly, other figures that Tarantino shows in the film that shows me he knows what he's doing. It's not an innocent entertainment. Mama Cass is shown in a brief scene at the Playboy Mansion with her fellow mama in the Mamas and the Papas, Michelle Phillips. So we show Steve McQueen, and then we see the Playboy Mansion. Let's break this down. Hugh Hefner was a very, very close friend of Roman Polanski and Tate. His right-hand man, a guy named Victor Lowndes, was the boyfriend of Playmate of the Month in August 1969, Connie Kresge. According to a friend of Connie Kresge, the last time I was here in Los Angeles, he said that Connie Kresge was aware that Polanski and Victor Lowndes spent a fortune collecting what she called fame porn. In other words, Hefner and Lowndes bought up any, like a picture of Joan Crawford dancing naked, Marilyn Monroe giving a blowjob, whatever they could find, they would spend top dollar for celebrity porn. And in 1969, Robert Evans, another sterling individual whose career speaks for itself, gave Roman Polanski a new video camera and video playing system as a thank you for the success of Rosemary's Baby. And Polanski used this video recorder not only for this, but partially, as you could find in any swinger scene since time began, to record orgies and sexual activities. Now, nothing about that would be surprising, but it is an integral reason this crime and the way that it happened has been covered up to such an almost comical degree of inventing nonsense to cover up what is basically ordinary human behavior. So the Playboy Mansion's role in Tarantino's film is interesting because another friend of Hugh Hefner was the estimable and late Vincent Bugliosi. Bugliosi wrote most of Helter Skelter after his ghostwriter Kurt Gentry gave him the draft at the Playboy Mansion as a guest of Hugh Hefner. So there's a lot of connections in these scenes that hint at but don't touch on the actual corruption that I'm speaking of. Mama Cass, again, I could go through the whole film, but I just want you to think about it if you watch it again. Jimmy Webb, who was a very popular songwriter in the 1960s, I don't know if any of you are aware of his work. He wrote many hit songs at the time. Recently confessed something, this is a rumor I had heard since the 1980s when I first began really looking into what these crimes were about. And what I had heard that was in the early morning of August 8th, 1969, many Hollywood celebrities went up to Cielo Drive as they were planning on to score drugs. And they came upon a nasty surprise. And one of the people whose names, along with a friend of Roman Polanski named Ian Quarrier, an actor, was Mama Cass. And I heard that again and again, but could never prove it, and so it just was another of these many legends and myths. The songwriter Jimmy Webb admitted in his recent autobiography that Mama Cass, one drunken night in London, admitted to him that she went up to Cielo Drive, saw the bodies, and freaked out, left, didn't tell the police, obstruction of justice, and even accomplished a murder. If you don't tell the cops you've seen a murder, you become guilty of obstruction of justice at the very least. Mama Cass told the mamas and the papas and other people in the rock doping scene that she knew what happened, and that's how people like Steve McQueen were already rushing to remove. And Mama Cass is much more essential to this story than has ever been known, because she was a lover of not just one, but at least 2 or 3 Canadian drug dealers, Doyle, Harrigan, and Dawson, who happened to be the ones who provided Wojtek Frykowski with a Canadian source for MDMA. And she knew that. Mama Cass knew that, and she deliberately did not tell the police, because of course that's going to reflect on her, and it's going to reveal what was really going on in Hollywood, which would shock absolutely nobody. So I just want you to think about that. Now you notice, and I could tell you 10,000 other things about the way the film is almost a deliberate hiding of the truth, taunting you with a little reference, but then obscuring it with a lie. That's what that is. So I want you just to reflect on those things. If those things are true, and I'm telling you to the best of my ability, I believe they are, that's what we have been witnessing for 50 years, is Hollywood covering up Hollywood, with the help of organized crime, corrupt judiciary, Vincent Bugliosi, whose reputation since his death has plummeted to the point where he is now a laughingstock. And that is a crucial landmark in Mansonology, because what that comes down to is this vindictive little prick who would sue anybody and harass them and try to destroy their career, Vincent Bugliosi, if you dared to suggest that he forced people to perjure themselves, coached Linda Kasabian to tell false testimony, etc., threatened to take people's children away if they didn't testify to his little fairy tale, Harry's Helter Skelter. Now that he's dead, suddenly journalists, authors, documentarians are willing to say Helter Skelter was bullshit. And just to give credit where credit's due, Mr. George Stimson here, if he would stand for a moment. You can show your t-shirt. And by the way, he was driving the Manson bus in Charles Manson Superstar, so he played Charlie in that scene. Mr. Simpson, although we have had a gentleman's agreement to disagree, we don't agree necessarily on all the mechanics of motive. We do agree on Helter Skelter being completely false and Bugliosi lying, which is completely illegal, and it should have put him in prison. And, you know, his reputation is falling apart. So George expertly dissected why Helter Skelter cannot be, and why Bugliosi lied, and what he lied about. So I would recommend Goodbye Helter Skelter as an introduction to that. Tom O'Neill, another friend of mine, or erstwhile, I have to add that usually to the word friend in my life. Tom O'Neill's recent book, Chaos, although again, I don't agree even slightly with his conclusions about CIA mind control and other such nonsense, he did do incredible research and prove that Vincent Bugliosi, Rudy Altobelli, and Terry Melcher were conspiring to help each other hide the truth about these murders. So you got that happened. A lesser-known director named Buddy Day, again, I don't agree with his take on Manson or what he concludes the crimes were about, but he also demolished Helter Skelter in his recent film final words. Before Vincent Bugliosi's death, those things would not have happened in any kind of mainstream venue because Vincent would have gone after them with all of his narcissistic ferocity. So this 50th anniversary and whatever humble efforts at destroying the helter-skelter edifice that I have attempted to do since at least 1988, helter-skelter is going to fall apart. But what is not falling apart, if you notice in the narrative that the mainstream media presents, and I saw it just today in a newspaper article, I'm paraphrasing, one thing that is not to be disputed is that Charles Manson was evil incarnate. But, okay, maybe helter-skelter was bullshit, maybe Vincent Bugliosi lied, but that part of the mythos, that whatever the motive was, Manson was evil incarnate, I don't see any sign of that budging even a little bit. So even as the mass media is forced to give up their very profitable helter-skelter circus, they are inventing new circuses to make Manson the epitome of evil. So that's some things to reflect on this 50th anniversary. And for magical reasons, I want to say I don't think there's anything good about the murder of these people in any way, or the murder of anyone. And I regret that we have to hold what is in some ways a positive celebration of Charles Manson, which my film still is, on the anniversary of the murders. Because in my mind, he was not responsible for these murders. In an alternate universe where truth prevails, they should be known as the Watson murders. They were the Tex Watson murders.
Damn right.
And Sharon Tate was an innocent bystander who happened to be killed trying to get away from a drug dealer, Tex Watson. The murders should be known really as the Watson-Frykowski murders instead of the Manson-Tate murders. So tonight, magically, I throw that into the universe, that as we turn the page of the 50th anniversary of the slaughter at Cielo and Waverly, that truth prevails, and that not only Vincent Bugliosi, who unfortunately cannot be punished the way Charles Manson was for so many decades, that the people responsible for this lie are held to account and brought to justice as more information comes out about the depth of their mendacity. Now, the Waverly murders that happened tonight, exactly tonight, 50 years ago on Waverly, very close to us in Silver Lake. It would take about an hour for me to explain the 6 or 7 possible motives and modus operandi for that crime. And though I believe I have figured out, let's say, 78% of what happened the previous night at Cielo, and there's still gigantic mysteries. How in the hell did William Garretson survive? Being a huge one that is practically inexplicable. However, with the Waverly murders, even after 30 years of looking into this, and many, many witnesses and people involved talking to me directly, and Charlie himself talking about the murders to me many, many times, I honestly don't know why they went there, when exactly they did what they did, or, even almost every detail of that night, unlike the panicky slaughter that happened at Cielo, remains what I've called the Waverly mystery. It is almost a perfect crime. So I could tell you briefly some of the motives. LaBianca was a minor mafia player. That was proven by the police in the very first homicide report. That again It's not a rumor, it's a fact. He was part of the Hollywood Bank, which was a money laundering bank in Hollywood that only organized crime figures were involved with. Briefly, I could get into his criminal career. He owed a huge debt to people connected to the major mafia kingpin, to use the journalistic language, Frankie Carbo. Frankie Carbo was an ex-con who was a prison associate of one Charlie Manson in the early 60s. Charlie himself talked incessantly that the reason for the Waverly crime 50 years ago was about acquiring a little black book, which Manson spoke of in detail, not as something that had information about crooked behavior going on in the governor's office, horse racing, very low-level, pragmatic, grubby crime again. Just crime. I am convinced, though I cannot prove it at this date, from the things Charlie told me and the way he referred to these crimes, there's another level to both of them, but particularly Waverly, in that I believe organized crime benefited from it, helped to cover it up, and that it was partially instigated by it. And I get into this in more detail in my book than I can. So to bring this to a conclusion, we will let Mr. Manson have the last word, as he usually did in any of our conversations. This recording is from 2009, on the pretty much right before the 40th anniversary of the Waverly murders, then 2009. And Charlie, towards the last decade of his life, thanks to the miracle of modern technology, was able to call me from his cell on, no pun intended, a cell phone, which he was very adept at getting smuggled to him. And this is not all of this conversation, it's one of many, many, many that he really was extremely forthcoming in these conversations, because there were no guards listening to him, there were no prisoners really able to hear him, and as you'll hear, this is another Charles Manson. This is the guy behind the act, to a certain extent. This is Charlie backstage in his cell in the middle of the night, calling me in Germany. And I asked him in this rambling conversation to explain an obscure detail about the Waverly murders that he had mentioned, which has to do with his second wife, Leona, or Candy, a prostitute that he married in the early 60s, and the Denver divorce court, which he divorced her in. And he always connected the black book that he got from LaBianca, or so he claimed, the Denver divorce court, his wife Leona, and he kept repeating it. If you look at his interviews, it's a mantra that something was owed and some debt was paid. And I tried to piece this together, and I finally asked him, can you clarify what the hell do these three things have to do with a crime 10 years later on Waverly with the LaBiancas? Secondly, he always made veiled, cryptic references to the Beach Boys having something to do with the Waverly crime. Dennis Wilson confirms this, whatever it may be, and I don't claim to know. He told many people privately, Dennis Wilson, in his drugged and drunken, tragic last years, that I knew what Charlie was doing. I know why these crimes happened. And he said, someday I'll write a book about it, and he never did. So there's, from various sides, suggestion of a connection between the Beach Boys, and this goes to full circle to the beginning. This is a Hollywood story about entertainment industry, corruption. It goes back 1,000,000 years to the Nickelodeon. It goes back to the suicide of Paul Byrne. It goes back to the murder of Thelma Todd by organized crime figures, and many other incidents where the Hollywood studios rewrote a crime to suit the entertainment industry's needs. So this is Charlie in 2009, and I asked him a question to try to explain this. And I think it's a particularly illuminating excerpt because it shows two things. A lot of people act like, well, you know, oh, Manson's mystical mumbo jumbo, all that gibberish, that was just a con to get laid or to impress people. No. You will see as he's very calmly and cooperatively trying to explain to me what the crime was about, to the degree that he will allow himself to because of his adherence to the underworld code of never snitching. Right? So, he explains it, but even when he's explaining this pragmatic reason for the crime, his religiosity and mysticism keep seeping into the conversation, because Charlie didn't just live in this world, he lived in both worlds at once. For instance, with Bernard Crowe, right after he shot him, this has been testified to, he's just shot a man. Instead of running, he said, he gives a little sermon and says, fear is just another form of awareness, before he stole another guy's buckskin coat and left. So crime and religion and spirituality, the underworld of mysticism and the underworld of crime were really connected with Charlie. And you'll hear this. So this is about a 9-minute excerpt from a very long cell phone conversation. And after you listen to it, this is Charlie in the middle of the night trying to explain what the Waverly crime was about. It's rambling, it goes in circles, but follow the logic. And he's saying it was a robbery, it was about money, and he's admitted to me cash was taken and paid to the straight Satans from that crime. So after you hear this, I would challenge you, unless you're an extreme skeptic, he's just saying it in plain spoken language. I wanted my money is what this is about. So you will hear how the entertainment industry is symbolized by the Beach Boys not paying Charlie $5,000 they owed him for the song Never Learn Not to Love. In his mind, you follow his logic, led to what happened 50 years ago tonight. So, Mr. Sound Engineer, if you will wave your wand, and if we can hear the tape.
Can I ask you a question, Charlie, about the divorce court in Leona, Denver? You remember that was one of my questions. When you were talking to Orlando about that, he was asking you about the LaBianca thing, and you said it had to do with that. Was I way off base in seeing a connection there?
No. I think it seems like I was born without anyone, so I become aware of everyone.
Right.
So as I became aware of everyone, I seen what was in their minds and what they were thinking and what they were doing. They were saying one thing and doing another. Doing one thing and then doing another, and hoping they could get out of that and go into something else. Everybody's always been running from themselves, hiding from themselves, coming to themselves, jumping up and down on themselves. There's never been a really no one there. It's just a reflection of the Holy Spirit, a reflection of the karmic balance of all living life forms, from the bugs to the birds, the trees. And even though it's finally lay a web upon your window, there's a reason for that. He's got some kind of cause, a purpose. And if the leaf falls in the tree, it's not only by the tree's permission, the wind has something to do with it. So it's a little bit of everybody. It has something to do with everything. I went to the Beach Boys and they owed me money. And I said, pay me my money. And they said, we don't have it because the business manager gambled it away.
I know. I was reading about that guy, Nick Grillo, right?
But the reality, the business manager didn't gamble it away. He just told the fools to gamble it away.
Right. Now, this is what when you came in to get your money, you said, I'll call New York and send a hitman out.
Yeah. So, the bottom line, the essence of eternity, you don't fuck with my money, man. You fuck with my money, you got to deal with it because God is my money.
Right.
And so you're a mother, not anyone else's money.
You mean when Wilson wouldn't pay you, you're talking about now? You mean when Dennis Wilson would not pay you for the music?
No. They none of them paid me.
Right.
They just gave me an excuse to the business manager. When I went to the business manager, he said, sue me. I said, I won't sue you. I'll find your fucking house. I'll blow your car off, motherfucker.
Right.
He gave I'll tell you everybody in your family, you stupid motherfucker, you pay me what you owe me. Because you don't get away with keeping me. You can't keep me because there's no such thing. And that anything between me personally. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do, totally.
It didn't have anything to do with me personally. In other words, I didn't perpetrate anything. I had to work around just to where it was going. Let that answer your Balianca.
Yeah. Okay.
I was looking for my money. I wasn't looking to have anyone push it up.
Right.
But they kind of did that for themselves when they didn't pay what they were supposed to pay.
Well, when you say that, you're implying a connection between Grillo, Beach Boys manager, and LaBianca in some way.
No, what the Beach Boys manager was an attacker.
Yeah.
And I told him, I went in, I said, you used a couple of my songs, and I'd like to pay them for it.
Sure. Right.
And the secretary says, get out of here. I said, I want to see somebody with authority. So she put me in Bianca's office.
You mean Grillo's
office? His office.
Grillo's office, not LaBianca's office. That's a whole thing.
Who?
You said they put me in LaBianca's office. You meant to say Grillo's office. Or
There's
did
a
you?
big difference.
No.
In other words, we don't think alike.
No, now I'm getting you. Now that's what I'm trying to get at. I understand.
Yeah, the mafia is only one body.
I got you.
You know, and it's like whenever I see the body of the mafia, I just move in because I know it's my body.
Right.
Now, I'm the Pope. I've been the Pope all my life. I was the Pope from my grandfather's grave, man. You know, like, I've known that since reform school.
Right.
But I'm talking about this particular episode.
Right, I got you.
So in this particular episode that you questioned about, like when I went into the office, it was an Italian.
Right.
As far as I was concerned, Gavillo, Capasano, Rocco, Apolaco, Zaccato, it was whoever I said it was.
Yeah.
Because I was the flunky of all that.
Right.
I watched the black dancers with those men as they died in prison. The Count of Monte Cristo died 1,000 times in my arms. I helped them. I wiped them. I took care of them. I bathed them. I cared for them. I loved them like brothers. And Tuliosi stabbed me in the back. Even this rat-ass motherfucking motorcycle club. So they're all gone.
Right.
Leaving. So when I went into the office, I told him, hey, how you doing, Kumba? He said, all right. I said, we got some business. You owe me some money. He said, I owe you nothing. Sue me. I told him, I won't sue you. I went through all that shit.
Right.
So when he kicked me out of the office, I reached over and I grabbed his trash can, right?
Yeah.
And I pulled the trash can out and I told him I emptied the trash in this town, man. And I took the trash and I put it on the desk. And I told the secretary, I said, keep your mouth shut, woman. I said, I'll come back and you'll be the sorriest thing you ever seen. I said, don't ever lie to me. And she looked at me like I was crazy, so I left and I called her back, right?
Right.
And I said, there's only one thing I want to know, nobody knows the difference. And if you don't tell me, you're in trouble. I said, what number did he call? He was going to call New York.
I got you.
Call, get out of my office.
Right.
To get out of my office or I'll call New York.
Right.
Well, you talk about calling the mafia on me, I want to know who you're talking to.
So you talked to his secretary after that?
Yeah, to find out what the phone number was.
Okay.
So I got the phone number.
Okay.
And I says, who you going to call about this? She said, well, he's got a call. West Hollywood. Oh, well, New York after all. I was looking for a call from New York.
Right.
So while he was in prison with the mafioso's daughter, she told me, she said, if they call New York, they have to call you back. Because they don't have any men over there.
Right. If they don't have any men in LA, they don't have any in the West Coast, or...
Well, they just don't have any there in that justice system.
Okay, gotcha.
That's why he lost the Pope.
Right. Okay,
So,
so
yeah.
you had a number in West Hollywood. What you saying is calling the mafia in New York, and I assume that number is somewhere in Los Angeles. Maybe
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
The number that I got from the secretary is in Hollywood.
Okay.
Wasn't in New York.
Right, I got
He
you.
didn't call me.
I got you. What I'm saying is, was it on Waverly Drive?
I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't say. Even if I did,
I know that.
call somebody else.
I know that.
If I know if anything is going to involve somebody else, I'll never say anything.
That's what I wrote to you. I know you're never going to snitch on people. But I can get a little closer to what happened.
Yeah, you can, but I don't want to involve other people.
I understand that.
Episodes that won't.
I totally understand. You're not going to snitch on
But
anything.
you understand how the Holy Spirit runs through different areas of, like you go to the Tide Creek.
Yeah.
And all these got gangsters in the areas that nobody knows they're gangsters. They think they're store clerks and shit.
Right. Oh, sure.
But whatever the mafia tells them, or they just don't exist no more, man.
Right.
Well, because